We're live. Welcome, anyone that's watching, all 0 of you at this point. But as usual, I'm going to start by showing some stuff that I've been working on this last week. Such as this, which was a little bit controversial. Controversial in the sense that initially when I drew it, this arm was way too long. I tried to make it smaller. I think it works now. I think it's like technically correct, but it still feels a little bit long to me. I don't know. This is a demo for my foreshortening class, my foreshortened figure drawing class. And yeah, I don't know. So in case anybody wants to know what was going on this last week, that is part of it. And whoa. Sorry, I'm getting my reference set up here. We also have, vases from last week, in case somebody wanted to see that. Not a 0, I'm a hero. Hey, if you made it in time to hear that comment, then congratulations. I think you were the first person. And you are not a 0. You are a hero. Okay, so I'm teaching a Bridgman class as well, right? So I've been doing all these like Bridgman demo things. You know, you can see I got a Bridgman leg. It's been leg week because both my Bridgman class and my structural figure drawing class kind of follow a similar methodology. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. A similar structure, right? Where we do like arms and then legs and then torso. And then we have a couple weeks of figure drawing where we kind of implement everything. So this last week was legs week, you know, so I've got Bridgman leg, Bridgman knee, in case anybody wants to see a Bridgman knee, back of the knee. Knees are something that I learned a lot from Bridgman about. There's certain things, in my opinion, that he's really good at and other things not so much, like everybody really. And then this was a structural figure drawing class, right, where we're just drawing legs and talking about underlying structure and how it I don't know, affects the drawing, how you can use it to your advantage to help construct a leg and how to build anatomy on top of it. And I don't know, I drew a lot of legs that week in that class. There's a whole bunch of these. And then of course, last week's live stream, which I filled in. If anybody was here for last week's live stream, you're wondering what it looks like with all the shadows filled in, that's it. That is what it looks like with the shadows filled in, just so you know. And then I posted this in the community tab on the YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to see this in like a better, you know, photo of it, you can see it there. We've also got a head tilt, subtle tilt. I haven't had a chance to shoot the head demo. I'm going to be doing that next for my head tilt class. And yeah, I think it'll be cool. I picked out some good reference for it. So this week we are drawing a female head drawing, portrait, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And it's got her head tilted down a little bit. Not a little bit, I mean, it's kind of a lot. I don't know, maybe not like way down, but it's a decent down tilt. So we're going to start with the usual, start with the cranial mass, and then we're going to take that cranial mass shape and tilt it down a little bit, or just angle it the direction of the head tilt. Right now, in this case, she has a relatively round cranial mass shape to begin with. So it's not going to be like super oval, especially because her head's not turned that far. But we do want it to turn, or to tilt downward a little bit, and have a little bit of an oval type shape to it. Something kind of like that, maybe. So I haven't actually drawn anything today, so let's see if I need a minute to get warmed up or not. Sometimes that happens. If you don't draw all day, that first thing you draw can be a little rough at times. So far, it seems okay. Okay, so then we're going to find, you know, the side of the head. So we've got our cranial mass, and it's not just a random oval, right? Like there's some logic to it. It's an oval that kind of fits her cranial mass shape and then also is tilted to kind of match her head tilt And then on top of that, we're going to find a nice sweep that kind of represents the side of the head over here, but at an angle that can account for the fact that her head's tilted down, right? So we're kind of picking just like a general angle here and trying to get it to match kind of what I'm seeing in the reference. It seems decent. Then on this side, right, we want a nice rhythmical sweep that goes from the back of the head down through the jaw all the way to the chin. It doesn't have to be perfect yet, but a nice kind of generalized sweep dropping down this way. Right, it's kind of coming down like that. And then also hitting the jaw, right, the back corner of the jaw, and then it's kind of sweeping inward a little bit this direction. Notice, keeping my marks very loose and light at this point because they're probably going to change, right? And then the chin is sitting like right down here. It seems decent, right? So does it feel tall? A little bit, yeah, but that's one of the things that happens when the head tilts down, right, is the back of the head moves up and we see more of the top of the head. So it actually creates a longer head shape. And so we can try and work some of that into here. And just kind of clean it up as we go and see if we can get it looking however it is we need it to look. Seems pretty good. These head shapes are really tough. Don't be deceived by the fact that I just kind of did this real quick, because it took me many hours, months, years of practice to get to the point where I can do that on my first try and have it be relatively correct. It is easily one of the hardest parts of the entire drawing, is just getting this shape correct. And which sounds, I don't know, it sounds kind of crazy because you're just like, it's just like a few lines, but it's very challenging. It's a very challenging few lines, and especially challenging when you consider that the rest of the drawing is kind of dependent on getting these few lines correct. I mean, it's a lot of pressure. Okay, so as the head tilts down, the center line is going to change, right? And we're going to have a tilt to the center line. But what's tough about this is we're going to have a tilted center line, but the brow line, the hairline, the nose line, the chin, all of that is going to stay level. It's not going to tilt with this line, which usually if we were looking at somebody straight on, you know, or somebody that doesn't have an up or down tilt to their head, usually all these lines would stay perpendicular as their head tilts side to side. But then that changes. If their head tilts down, but not to the side, then everything stays parallel and level this way, but the center line changes, you know, which is very, I don't know, challenging. It's tough to get exactly right. It's one of those things where, like, as a concept, you explain it and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then you try and do it and it's actually kind of hard. Okay, so we've got center line here. I'm just double checking the angle, just taking a quick little measurement, kind of comparing it to the reference. It's close. Maybe we can angle it a tiny bit more, but I think it's pretty close. We're going to need separation between the ear and the back of the jaw, right? So we need to find the back of the jaw, because this is just kind of like the whole shape, right? And like more like a rhythmical connection between the jaw and the back of the head. And then we can see the ear doesn't sit, like it sits in a little bit, which means the back of the jaw and the ear are going to connect probably somewhere around in here. Now keep in mind, when the head tilts down, like I said, the center line tilts as well, and then the corner of the jaw ends up sitting a little bit higher, right? So the ear and the back of the jaw move up, and then like the tip of the nose will move down. It's a very specific relationship that exists. And you'll see in the head as it tilts various directions. Okay, and then her ear is sitting also like way up above the corner of the jaw. Different people, you'll see different amounts of space between the bottom of the ear and the corner of the jaw. Some people, they're right next to each other. Other people, not so much. What's up?
I have a quick question for you that I think I'd like to ask you before you continue ahead.
Yeah.
Ryden asks, so the lines going horizontal don't stay perpendicular to the center line?
No, not if the head is tilted forward or backward. If they're, and that's really tough, right? So if you think about it, let's draw some boxes because I like drawing boxes. Let's say we have a straight on type head that we're looking at. Am I on screen? Yeah. And we're looking at someone straight on, right? And maybe it looks kind of like this. Here's our box. Our center line goes straight up and down. Oh, that wasn't a great line. Try that again. There we go. Goes straight up and down that way. And then the third lines, this is just a box, keep in mind, but they'll stay perpendicular to the center line, right? Kind of like that. And then, of course, they'll wrap around the corner, kind of like that. And then if we tilt it, right, say not forward or backward, but just side to side, then we end up with something kind of like this, right, where we'll have a tilt. Right, and then we're going to have the same kind of perspective here. Right, and now our center line is also tilted, right? Everything tilts together if we're tilting side to side, right? Everything stays tilted evenly. And that's usually what I talk about in my classes, because I don't usually, like I teach more fundamental type stuff typically, you know, and so what happens then if we tilt the head back or down one way or the other, what you'll notice is this kind of happens. Let's see if I can draw this here. Let's say we're going to tilt it, well, we'll tilt it down like it's tilted right now. And keep in mind, I'm not putting any perspective on these boxes, really. These are kind of like isometric perspective, isometric boxes. Right, so say we take our box and we tilt it down. Although I did put a little bit of perspective on these, I guess, but I'm not doing it on this one. Right, we tilt this down. And you'll notice with our down tilt, there's no side-to-side tilt. So it's tilting this way. Our center line is also tilting this way. Right? But then there's no, like, since there's no side-to-side tilt, it's only down. The other lines stay level, right? They stay like this. And so they're no longer perpendicular to the center line. And that's part of what makes drawing these like up and down tilts really tough, is figuring out not only what happens when you do that, but then also how do you draw that, but then also add perspective if you're in a situation where you need like a lot of like perspective, like say the camera's really close or I don't know, whatever. In this situation, everything's flattened out and it's the equivalent of the camera being like really far away and zoomed in, and that kind of flattens out the perspective. And then the same thing happens when we tilt the head back, right? So say now we're tilting back, and we can tilt it back really far too. And it'll have the exact same kind of effect. So this is the type of stuff I've been talking about in my head tilt class. Right, is now, notice everything's still pretty level, right? All this stuff is level, 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 level. Although it looks a little weird. Let's fix it. Right, now our center line also is going to be tilted way back. Right, kind of like that. Only now, once again, our third lines, we break this thing into thirds, they're all level and they're no longer perpendicular to the center line. Now, what's challenging is when someone tilts their head back or forward and also has a little bit of a side tilt, right? Then things get really challenging. And that's what you were seeing. Let me see if I can find it. I have the first week of the demo for my head tilt class. I showed that. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. And to be honest, I kind of regretted choosing this because it was rather challenging to draw. Here we go. So this, you can see, is tilted back, but then also she has a side tilt as well, right? And that's what kept everything kind of parallel. Right? In reality, if she didn't have the side tilt and only tilted her head back, all of this stuff would have stayed pretty level, right? And this first week, I was trying to show like fundamental type stuff, and for some reason, I chose a drawing or a piece of reference that had like a side tilt as well, which really complicates things. And then that was from my foreshortening class. But this is a good example. This was from the live stream a couple weeks ago, right? Or 3 weeks ago, maybe. Here we're looking up at him. So it's kind of like similar to having his head tilted back a little bit. Although I guess maybe not. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe that's not a good example. Take it back. But this has that same challenge. This is really hard, right? Because it's tilted back and she has a side tilt. This one, she just has down tilt, but no side to side tilt. Her head's still side level, like side to side. So that's where all this is coming from, right? And why this is so challenging. Yeah, so I don't know. That's it. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a good question, though. Okay, so then as the head tilts down, as you can see, we're in like this situation here. So what happens is the brow line is going to drop down lower, and we see more of the top of the head. These boxes I drew, they're not good head shapes, but it's the same principle, right? Same idea. So her hairline now is going to be dropping kind of low this way, right? Kind of drops down here, and now we're seeing like a whole bunch of the top of the head up here. But notice that hairline, keeping pretty level, right? The brow line, I'm also going to keep somewhat level here. Right, kind of like that. And then we'll have the nose line, right, or the connection point of the nose relatively level, about like that. Her head's not tilted very far. I don't think her head is tilted enough to really disrupt the thirds very much. But I will say on her head, just in general, without any up or down tilt, I feel like she usually has like a bottom third that's a little bit longer than the top two, and her forehead is like just a little bit small. So I don't know, I'm just going to measure real quick here. Kind of check. Top third. Yeah, so in this case, I guess her head's tilted far enough that it's kind of making the thirds even. It's sort of getting rid of the bottom third being bigger. I'm going to make that just a little bit larger. That seems pretty good. Let's get rid of that. Okay, then we're going to have a little bit more construction, right? So figuring out kind of like where does the side plane of the head sit. It's going to be around here-ish. And we're seeing just the side over here. Her ear sits pretty high up in this case. So it's like way up here. And then what's interesting is her ear, like a lot of people's ears like kind of align with the angle of the back of their jaw. Her ear kind of like tilts forward a little bit. Not a lot, but enough that it's kind of noticeable, but I don't know that I'm going to draw it that way. I might just keep it kind of more how I would expect it to be, just for construction purposes. Also, she has a very small ear as well. You know, some people have bigger ears, some have smaller ears. I would say hers is on the smaller side. All right, get rid of our construction lines. Right, and now we can kind of see that boxy shape that we're developing, where our third lines are kind of wrapping around the shape of the head. And we'll see if we can find eye sockets. This is going to be tricky. So we're going to have the glabella kind of dropping in this direction. Right about there. The inside of this eye socket we're going to put in here. Right, kind of coming over that way. Then, for right now, I'm going to keep this relatively flat across here. But keep in mind, as the head drops, the brow line tends to flatten out. Right, so this is going to still be pretty flat over here on this side. Kind of rhythmically maybe connect that a little bit. And then we'll find over here a little bit of the brow sticking out this way, and then it kind of drops back in over here. Okay, we're going to find the sweep of the nose, or at least the angle of it, right away. Right, kind of coming down that way. And that's going to help us kind of judge how much space we need over here. And then at the same time, we can come over here and find the rest of this eye socket. Sitting down in there. And brow. The eye, it seems like, is mostly contained within this shape. So I don't think the eye is going to overlap our eye socket bone, the zygomatic bone over here. So this area is really tough, right? I usually kind of work out the nose and the rest of this eye socket and cheekbone simultaneously, because they all have to work together properly, right? Like everything has to align just right. And so we can come in here and kind of start to find the nose. And I know the tip of the nose is going to drop maybe just below our line right here, right? Because remember, as the head tilts down, the tip of the nose drops lower. The connection point of the nose stays the same, but then the connection point, but then the actual tip of the nose itself drops down lower, right? So it's connecting up here. You know, it's connecting up here and dropping down as the head tilts down. then we get a little bit of nostril out this way. Now, is that wide enough to be her nose? Is it the right shape? I think it's close enough for right now. But I'm just going to kind of leave it alone, and we'll come back and mess with it in a little bit, add the nostril and things like that, because that's enough that we can come in and start looking for the rest of this shape. What's up?
I have another comment to read
Okay.
you from earlier from Navad,
Okay.
who said that your head construction technique was
Yeah.
kind of a combination between Loomis and Bridgman because it's got the
Yeah.
characteristics of a sphere and a cube. Would you
Little bit.
agree?
Yeah. I mean, my head construction techniques are a combination of a whole bunch of things. I mean, it's a combination of, I'd say mostly Riley and Loomis and just kind of my own ideas. The cube stuff, like I've never studied Bridgman heads because I don't like them that much, to be honest. I don't think they look quite right. They look a little bit odd to me. So I just don't study them. I never have. And I don't know. But yeah, I could see where that's coming from for sure. I get it. Get this other eye socket up in here. And then we kind of find the rest of the side plane of the head, you know, and now we can actually find some of the cheek and some of those other things. This nose feels a little bit wide. I'm going to pull this in a little bit. Right, so we get some cheekbone, but it's all very subtle.
Alex is here,
Oh, Alex, welcome.
and he said that Brian's construction method reminds him the most of Brian Knox.
Nice. I appreciate that. We just kind of follow generally what's going on down here.
I have another question to read you.
Yeah.
This question is from Garopaga. I'm
Okay.
sorry if I said your name wrong. And they said, Brian, how do you know where to place that vertical line that divides front and side of the head? It doesn't look like it aligns with the corner of the eye socket.
No, it doesn't. It's in the middle of the rounded part of the eye socket is right where this goes. And this is one of the things that I've never seen anywhere before. This is something that, as far as I know, I mean, I came up with it, but who knows? Maybe other people have come up with it as well. But it's, I don't know. Like, I had a really hard time with the Loomis head stuff because to me, it didn't totally make sense. And so I started looking for ways to make it make sense. And kind of what I hit on was the fact that the head, especially up in the forehead area, is very rounded, you know, in the brow. So to compare it to either a box or a cylinder, I don't know, it's like kind of somewhere in between, right? It's not either. So what I ended up with was kind of this. So when you watch, I'm running out of places to draw example things. When you watch like Loomis draw a head, I guess you can't watch him anymore, but when you look in his book and you see a Loomis head, right, he draws this like kind of shape. He's got this kind of shape, and then he draws a, you know, and then he finds like center line and thirds and all that. And then he has this little circle that he draws over here. And he goes like, here's like the side plane of the head, right? And I had the hardest time figuring out what he was doing with that. It never made sense to me. I could never get it to work. It would sort of align with like this part of the head a little bit. And that never made sense to me either, because like the eye socket is supposed to cut into the side plane of the head a little bit. So if this is the side plane of the head, then how is it touching this corner? Like it never logically made sense to me. Like I could kind of get it to work if I played with it for a while and I get it to look okay, but like it never sat right with me 100%, to be honest. And so what I eventually figured out was what he is drawing is actually the flat part of the side of the head, right? And then there's another flat part, like say out here, say for the forehead, right? There's like a flat part of the forehead up here. And then in between, there's this like rounded area in between these two. And that was eventually what I figured out. And that was kind of the key to everything. So now when I draw heads, this is actually the corner. So if we think of it as a box, right? And we take a box and we say, okay, our head is a box. I draw my box. And let's make this side more narrow maybe. Right? And then that is not a great box, but hopefully you kind of get the idea, right? The corner is the rounded part, right? So if we were to round this out and turn it into an actual head, it's these corners that get rounded out, right? This part would get rounded out. And then the actual flat parts would start like here and here, right? And so this would be flat, this section, and then this section is rounded, and then we hit another flat section, right? And that same thing is happening on the head here. We have like a flat part of the forehead and then a rounded part for the corner of the head, and then another flat part for the side plane of the head. So when I draw this, what I'm drawing is essentially this line that runs through the rounded part of the head. And that to me made like way more sense logically and explained what Loomis was doing with this circle he always puts on the side of the head. And so to me, like you'll see me draw this a lot of the time, where you'll see like, I'll do this to kind of show the side plane of the head, which logically makes a lot of sense to me, because now we have the eye socket kind of cutting into the side plane of the head a little bit. But where Loomis is putting it is he would have it more not on the rounded part, but on the flat part of the side plane of the head. And that makes a smaller circle and gives you more of that like Loomis type circle over there. And then we have another flat spot here on the forehead. And then this part in the middle is rounded, right? And so to me, that's where I'm trying to put this line. Because if it were a box, that's where the corner would be, but it's not. It's, it's a head shape. So it's kind of like a mix between the two a little bit. Also, this feels too wide to me. Let's see if we can correct that. Okay, so down here we're going to have thirds, right? We break our bottom third into thirds. Yeah, essentially the way that I draw, like I was in a weird position where I learned to draw kind of through teaching, which I think is pretty unusual. I just happened to be in a situation at the right place at the right time where they needed a teacher, and I was there and I was pretty good at explaining things. My drawings weren't great, but my explanations were, and boom, I had a teaching job. And but then as I learned to draw over the years, it came largely through teaching and looking for ways to explain this stuff. So I was always focused on like, okay, we're teaching Loomis stuff, but how do I explain it in a way that actually makes sense? And I had the hardest time with it for a long time. And eventually I kept analyzing it, and eventually that was what I came up with. That was what I determined, and at least what made sense to me. Okay, let's see what's going on here. I feel like there's something about this head shape that's a little bit odd. I think part of it is we can change this angle. I think this actually needs to angle more. She has a pretty extreme jaw angle. Tilt this a little bit more, and then see if we can get a nice kind of rhythmical sweep down into the chin that keeps the corner of the jaw relatively high, right? The corner of her jaw is sitting level with her mouth. Actually, no, I'd say it's partway, a little above the mouth maybe. It feels a little bit better. And then right now the eyebrows are missing. Her eyebrows, as the head tilts down, we pick up more of the curvature of the head. And so her eyebrows are kind of arcing up and around more. So it'll look better once we get some eyebrows on there, I think. Also, I think changing this tilt helped a lot too. I think that's looking a little bit more like her. Okay, so let's see if we can get a quick neck shape on here. Pull this ear in just a little bit. Her head's turned to the side, so the neck is going to be a little bit challenging, right? So we have sternocleidomastoid, which is the muscle on the side of the head, dropping almost straight down. I'm going to angle it just a little bit, but it's coming, gosh, I don't know. It's almost straight down in the reference photo. Put it kind of like that maybe. And then we get a little bit of it, a little bit of the muscle behind that one poking out on the side over here. And that starts roughly even almost with the corner of her jaw, about here. You know, and this is the sweep that I would use to kind of construct her neck, is this C curve. And then we can't see in here, but there's going to be some other part of her neck in here, just a little bit maybe, or maybe not. Actually, no, I think there would be. It's just all in shadow, so we can't see it. And then we get kind of like the trapezius coming out from here. Right, kind of coming over this way.
There's a question for you here.
Okay.
This person is asking, well, they said, I'm new to drawing.
Yeah.
And always mess up the face. Any tips?
Don't mess up the face. No, I mean, the tip would be practice. Gosh, I don't know. If you're new to drawing, I would say practice, practice the big shape of the head, practice basic shapes a lot, right? Like your understanding of just simple boxes like this and how they work and how they change and move in space is pretty helpful. Because as you can see, that's exactly what I'm looking at here, is trying to figure out how that stuff works. And, you know, you'll have to do a number of studies. You'll have to, you know, probably do some Loomis heads and some Riley heads and figure out what it is they're trying to show with the way that they're constructing things. And then, you know, just practice a lot more than anything is really what it comes down to. Not to oversimplify, but the more you draw, it's tough because there's a lot of different components involved in drawing, right? Like there's a knowledge component where you have to have, you know, a certain amount of knowledge to be able to do this. Like there's a certain amount of anatomy stuff you need to know, perspective stuff. Like there's a lot of like knowledge-based things. But then on top of that, there's a lot of like physical components, like dexterity, right? Can your arm do what you need it to do? Can your arm draw a nice straight line like this? Can your arm, draw a nice clean oval? If it can't do those things, you're going to have a really hard time drawing a head, because notice that's everything I'm doing is constructing out of little basic things like a little oval, a straight line, a nice even curve. So you have to develop the dexterity to be able to do those things. And it's really critical, and it takes a long time to build dexterity. It is not easy. And it just takes a lot of practice. Then there's also like your brain's ability to judge proportion, right? And to see proportion and to judge angles properly and to do stuff like that, which is also incredibly challenging. Not to be discouraging, but like essentially you're building all of these skills at once when you're practicing drawing. And that's what makes it so hard, is like you have to be able to do all of those things. And if you can't do them all, then it's going to be, your drawing's not going to look all that great. And the only way to overcome that is to just practice so much that you develop all of those skills and can use them all at once. And then what makes it even more challenging, not that it needs to be more challenging, but it is. His head's still too wide. This is bothering me. But there's like another component, which is, yeah, that looks better. Which is, forget where I was going with that. I got distracted by how wide the head was. Oh, I know. Making things happen in an intuitive way, right? Because our brain has a weird way of working where it can't actually do more than one thing at once consciously, which sounds weird because we always feel like we're multitasking and doing a bunch of stuff. But the truth is, you can only be like consciously focused on one thing at a time. It's hard to, not only hard, I mean, it's literally impossible to consciously focus on more than one thing at a time. And so then, that kind of raises the question of like, well, how do we do all this complicated stuff then? Like obviously, I'm thinking about more than one thing. And the way to do that is because our brain has an ability to make things happen like on an intuitive level, right? And so to do that, we have to practice it so much that our brain kind of gains the ability to do it without actually thinking about it. And then we say something has become intuitive. But until you've practiced something over and over and over, it can't be done intuitively. It's just not possible. And so the only way to reach that point is to practice a lot, and that's how you kind of gain the ability to, do all those things at once, get your arm doing what it needs to do, judge proportion, judge angles, all at the same time without actually consciously having to think about it much. That is the way it happens. But it takes a lot of practice and a long time to get your brain up to that point. So if you're new to drawing and things aren't working and you're like, man, what the heck? I keep practicing and practicing. That's what you're working towards, right? Is you have to practice in a way that helps things become intuitive. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of time. Also, I don't know why I'm drawing hair at this point. It's too early. I got distracted. His head still feels a little bit wide, but that's okay. So that's what I would recommend. I know it can be discouraging when you're new and everything's kind of challenging and difficult. But if you practice enough, it will start to work. Trying to get this nostril on here, but it's a tough shape. Tough shape, partly because her head's tilted down. So we're Only seeing a little bit of it, but then we're still seeing some of it. You know, her head's not tilted down so far that we're not seeing the nostril. It's definitely there. So that's about right. Well, it seems pretty good. Okay, so as we carry on, next we're going to need like some space up here in the eyebrows, or not the eyebrows, in the brow bone, right? And figure out kind of like where the actual opening of the eye socket is up in here, right? Which is going to run roughly right up around here. Right, kind of like that. And so we're seeing like a really specific thing here, which is the kind of thickness of the brow bone and then the actual opening of the eye socket itself, which are kind of two different things. And then we'll have, of course, the mouth sitting down here. The eyes are going to sit right up in here. So what I'm looking for to help place the eyes is kind of where the side plane of the nose starts, like the separation between the side plane and the cheek, which is never this clear. I mean, if you look, it actually looks like that separation point goes more like this, but we're kind of like simplifying it and making it a little bit more obvious. And what it's going to do is we're trying to parallel this line, right? We draw a parallel line to that. And if you read the Loomis book, he'll say that it starts at the edge of the nostril and goes back to the tear duct and is parallel to this line. In my experience, that is sometimes the case, but a lot of the time, the nostril sticks out farther than this point, you know, and you have to kind of be able to recognize the difference when that's happening and when it's not. And that's another thing that makes drawing so difficult, is just being able to observe who you're drawing and what type of head they have. You know, is it a long head shape, a short one, wide, thin? I mean, there's just so many different types of heads out there and different types of people. It really adds like another dimension to the whole, you know, trying to figure out how to draw problem. Okay, so moving on. All right, we're going to have the mouth sitting down here. It's in shadow, so we can't really see the other side all that well, but, you know, I've drawn a lot of mouths, so I'm confident that I know what's there. This line here is the tooth cylinder kind of pushing the mouth forward, right? The chin is also getting pushed forward from the center line, right? So we had our center line, nose kind of projects out from the center line. The tooth cylinder projects outward from the center line, and the chin, all three of them. And, you know, if you look at a skull, which sometimes I have sitting next to me. Yeah, I do. It's basically this, right? This part actually projects forward, right? So our center line would go from like brow to, you know, the connection point of the nose, and then like the, you know, the chin. And then this part's like pushing forward in front of that a little bit. And then it also varies by person as well, because there's different skull types that actually are a little bit different. But that would complicate things. We don't need to talk about that right now. So her lips are going to sit basically right down here. So I broke this space into thirds. basically this line, so if this is equal thirds, this line is going to be the bottom of the top lip. And then from there, her mouth comes out this way, up a little bit. And then we hit the node. And then over here, it's going to come back this way a little bit, and then it kind of cuts back in, right? Because we're getting like a 3/4 lip shape here. And then I think we're seeing like a little bit of the node over here as well, just a little bit. Now, I've drawn a lot of lips. I mean, I've taught facial features classes like a zillion times. And, you know, knowing the anatomy helps, right? We have the philtrum, we have the body of the lip, the node. We get the tubercle down below here. Right, we get the tubercle. And then kind of an area where it gets kind of pressed up against the bottom lip. It kind of flattens out. Kind of shoots up this direction a little bit. The node will usually have kind of like a darker little shape underneath, and then it's really soft on the top and side, right? Because that's kind of like a connection point where everything, like there's a whole bunch of muscles that connect around the cheek and the jaw, and they all kind of connect into this little fibrous area on the corner of the mouth. You know, and then we get the bottom lip kind of coming out from here, dropping down this way.
Got another question to read you here.
Okay.
This is from the same person who said they're new to drawing.
Yeah.
And they ask, is there a tutorial or an exercise you would suggest to start with? And they said they have about 10 days of drawing experience.
Ooh, 10 days.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
start.
pretty new. Yeah, I mean, that's a good start. But yeah, I mean, you're definitely, you know, in the category of being new. Man, to start, I mean, aside from just saying like, take my fundamental head drawing class would be a good place to start. But I mean, I'm assuming that's not a good answer.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay. I mean, let's say that's not an option for whatever reason. There's books you can get that are helpful, right? I mean, I mentioned Loomis. The Loomis book is good, but then, you know, you have to contend with trying to understand that way that he draws, right? There's like Loomis and Riley. Watching these demos, I think would help. I mean, these, you know, and I have like a whole like kind of beginning level series of head drawing things on my YouTube channel. If you go look at the actual channel itself. And I think those would be helpful. There's also, I'm trying to think, I mean, because your options really are, you know, books and studying books, or video, or taking actual classes. I mean, if you have the ability to go take, you know, to move here to Encinitas and go take a class at Watts or something like that, I would certainly recommend that. But again, that's not usually something most people can do. So yeah, I mean, I would say get some good books. There's even like, if it's just something like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, like that's a pretty good book. That's, you know, kind of beginner-ish level. The Loomis book, also beginner-ish level. Let me see if I can reach this over here. This is How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. This is a cool book. I like John Buscema, or Buscema. I don't know how to say his name, but he has cool drawings. I've always liked him, but I can't remember what type of head information, but they have good stuff, right? Like thinking of things in terms of basic shapes, right? Like practicing basic shapes a lot. Practice mark making is really important. Some basic perspective is going to be really helpful. Like just how do you draw a box or a cylinder in perspective? You don't have to take it this far. You don't have to draw a whole city. I mean, if you're just starting out, you know, there's some cool stuff in here for sure. And these are just fun drawings, right? Like I used to copy these drawings back when I was a student just because they're fun to copy. They have a bunch of energy and they're cool. And I used to copy these all the time, right? These little like block and cylinder people. I don't know where the head drawing stuff is in here. Oh, here it is. Yeah, these are pretty cool. There we go, drawing the human head. You know, copying this guy would be fun. Like, yeah, it's probably not going to turn out great, but it's a fun drawing to study and it would have a bunch of helpful stuff in it. But these little basic head shapes, right? Like copying these types of things are really helpful and trying to understand like, okay, this is a box. You know, it's like a rounded box essentially is what a head is, but it's head shaped. That's one thing you kind of have to realize is when you take a class, they always talk about it in terms of a box or a cylinder. But it's not actually that simple. It's a much more complex shape, you know. But yeah, any of this stuff I think would be really cool. It's a fun place to start. This is one of the first books I started drawing from. And it's really fun. It just talks about just basic. It's interesting because there is like basic construction stuff, which is helpful. But then there's other things where like, even though the book is presented as like a beginning level book, there's actually some really complex stuff that they cover in here. You know, in terms of like composition and how to show like dynamic images. Like it gets pretty complicated by the end. It has some inking stuff. It's pretty cool. Yeah, so those are kind of your options, right? Here's another book that I like, which is this Vanderpool book. I used to copy stuff out of here all the time. And you can see, you can practice facial features is kind of what I used it for. You know, and it has a mix of things, right? It's got all these like little drawings up on the sides of the pages that I used to copy, which are pretty helpful. You know, copy all this stuff. And then there's like every now and then a page that has like rendered type drawings, you know, and then you can work a little bit more tonally and try and figure out, you know, how is he using edges? How is he using that type of stuff, right? So you can do studies like that. And this guy's really good for facial features. More than anything, I would say, and what I used to do is practice drawing boxes and cylinders from every possible angle, right? And it would help probably to do just study a little bit of perspective to help get started with that. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then study boxes and cylinders, draw a lot of those. Mark making, just practice general mark making, straight lines, right? We always talk about C curves, S curves, and straights. If you look at what I've drawn here, literally the only marks I have made are either a C curve, an S curve, or a straight. And I don't think I've actually made an S curve yet. So far, I think this entire thing is a mix of C curves and straight lines, and that's it. And that really keeps the drawing organized and makes it feel solid and clear. And, you know, so that is what you have to train your arm to do, is to train it to make really clear marks and practice. You know, a C curve is just any type of single curve, essentially. So you practice like, here's a C curve. Here's a C curve. Draw one going this way, maybe. Maybe more extreme one. You know, and I would just fill up pages and pages of this stuff. And then the last thing I would say, which is probably actually one of the more important ones, boxes and cylinders, and then practicing circles and ovals, right? So you have to be able to draw really, really clean circles. Yeah, it's turned out more like an oval, but whatever it is, it needs to be a nice clean shape. You know, and you have to basically do this so much that you gain the ability to just draw any shape you need at any time and have it be incredibly clear. And so what I would recommend is, if you're, you know, just starting out, if you're going to say like, okay, I've got a few hours that I'm going to study, right? And I would spend the first like 20 or 30 minutes of that time doing stuff like this and practice drawing boxes, right? Like this, cylinders, right? We've got to be able to draw really nice, clean cylinders. and figure out how to get those to work. Draw them from various angles, right? Coming towards us, going away from us. I don't know, something like that, right? Get a cylinder, right? What's a cylinder look like if it's more narrow? You know, can you draw a cylinder like this? You know, can you have a cylinder coming towards us a lot more where it's like almost open? You know, so practice that type of stuff. And I know that seems like, well, wait a minute, I'm trying to draw a head and you're telling me to draw boxes and cylinders, but this is like the core skill set that you need in order to make something like this work. You know, now obviously you need to know a lot more than just this. This is just the beginning. And then I'm taking this like core set of skills and then using it to describe a whole bunch more information that I've learned over the years. And, but that's where it starts is figuring out exactly those types of things. Okay, let's get some eyebrows on here. She's looking very eyebrow-less. They're going to sit right around there.
There's another question I could read you maybe while you're drawing.
What is it?
This is another question from, and Brickman, I will get to your question, by the way. This is from someone else who's building on what you were just talking about and said, since we're talking about drawing books, could you give me a recommendation for a good book or tutorial series that could help me with figure drawings?
Yeah.
Brian just so happens to teach this very subject.
I do. I mean, if you want a series of classes that teaches figure drawing, I like to think mine are reasonably good. So you can check those out. In terms of books, interesting. Most of the books I have, I look to for like more for head drawing information. Don't know why this is exactly, but I don't use the books that I have for figure drawing very much. But like Loomis, of course, is like the classic one where everybody's like, oh, you got to study Loomis. His figure drawing stuff is okay. It's just, I don't know, for some reason I never like clicked with it really the way I did the head drawing stuff. And even then, as you've seen, I don't really use his head drawing stuff the way that he intended, I think. Yeah, figure drawing's a tough one. I mean, there's a ton of figure drawing books out there, but like the way that I draw is like a mix of like a whole bunch of them plus my own stuff. So I couldn't really say like, oh, you just study this one book, because the truth is there's a lot of books and you need to be able to kind of look at them and discern, you know, and figure out like, is this the way I want my drawings to look? And if it's not, then don't study it, you know, which sounds a little weird, but that's kind of the truth. That's kind of what it comes down to. I don't know. I have a less good answer for the figure drawing one, admittedly. I mean, other than take my classes. But I don't know. I'm looking around. I mean, to be honest, this How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, like if you're talking just beginning level, you know, you need something kind of fun to draw at the same time that's not too dry. I mean, the figure stuff in here is pretty cool. I mean, it's got a lot of good concepts. It's, you know, even if you're not into superheroes, the drawings themselves have like an energy to them that's pretty fun. And I used to copy this guy's drawings all the time. They're really good. So I would recommend this. This one, I mean, it has figure stuff in it, but it's good. It's just not as good as like some other stuff that's out there. But it can be worth studying for sure. I mean, it's not like it's bad. I mean, it's still good stuff. It's just a little bit dry. There's Bridgman, right? I mean, I've been teaching a whole class about Bridgman this term, you know, and so you can go through the Bridgman book and work through some of these. But the problem is, if you're like a beginning level student, these drawings are really cryptic. You know, as you can see, they're really like kind of, they're not sloppy, but they're just hard to interpret. Sometimes they're a little bit sloppy, I guess. And some are sloppier than others, but they look really cool. They have a really dynamic look to them, you know, so once you start getting more advanced and you start kind of understanding the fundamentals a little bit, then you want to study these so you can kind of take some of that, the mark making that he uses and the way that he designs things and incorporate that into your drawing. But I don't know if Bridgman is like the best like beginning book necessarily, you know, but that's kind of what I've been teaching lately. So I'm running a whole Bridgman class. So I've been doing stuff like this, you know. I mean, I've been drawing Bridgman legs. You know, we've got Bridgman knee, Bridgman back of the leg, you know. And then on the last 2 weeks, what we're going to do, like we're going to spend a week on arms, a week on legs, a week on torso. And then the last 2 weeks, we're just going to do some figure drawing and try to bring some of his mark making and his design sense into our own drawings is kind of the idea. But truthfully, I would say take some of my classes. I know that sounds self-serving, but I mean, unless you want to take in-person classes and you have like the means and ability to move somewhere and take those classes, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not like aren't other online classes that are good. There are. I just can't think of what they are off the top of my head. Okay, so I'm going to keep working on this. I don't know if that was a great answer. It was mediocre. Not the best answer I've ever given.
That was a pretty good answer.
Also, you'll notice that Olivia has a microphone now, so everybody can hear what she's saying.
I do have a microphone now. The same person just asked, where can I find the courses of yours?
My courses you can find on my website, which is foundationartschool.com. It's kind of a weird time because we're about to undergo a big redesign of the site. But we've got, like usually in the past, I've always taught, a train going by. In the past, I've always taught like, you know, like we're a regular school, like where I started out teaching, where I would run like 4 or 5 classes at a time for 5 weeks at a time and work through them that way. And then each time a class ends, what I would do is that class would get added to like a library of classes, and then you could subscribe and get access to that library and watch all of my past demos and classes and things like that. You know, and that's still there, but it's going to be changing a little bit in the sense that nobody, you know, like people looked at that and they weren't entirely sure what to do. It's just like a big jumble of classes and stuff. So we're going to make it more directed. And we're coming up with like workbooks and things that are going to help walk people through which classes to take, what to study, you know, what type of warm-ups do you do? Like it's going to talk about everything. So it'll be like a complete program. But in order for that to work, it needs to be pretty long, right? So it's going to be like a 6-month, it'll be designed as a 6-month program. And then we'll give people access for like a year. And then you can kind of like use it however you want. Like the way I'm designing it kind of assumes that you can study twice per week. And so you've got, but I know that's not practical. Like twice per week exactly for 6 months is kind of unlikely. Life gets in the way. I mean, I totally understand that. So we'll give you access for a year. And then the idea is you can kind of like break it up however you need to, right? Like if you need to study, take a week off every now and then, it's not that big a deal. If you need to study for like a few months and then you have something coming up where there's a month where you can't study and then you pick it up later. I mean, you can break it up however you need to, essentially. And yeah, so there's going to basically be a head drawing program, a figure drawing program, and an anatomy program. The two head and figure drawing programs, each one is composed of 10 classes that you would work through over 6 months to a year. And it's like a real drawing program. Like it, by the time you get done, you will have real, assuming you put in the work, right, and actually do it, you'll have actual drawing skills, and it's not like you'll be able to go work. Like you're not going to be an illustrator when you're done, but you will have real fundamental skills that you can then go and apply to wherever else you want to go study. Like if you want to be an illustrator and you're like, I really want to take classes at like, I don't know, CDA or Brainstorm or something like that. Like their classes are really advanced. They're not easy and they're really competitive environments. And like any beginning level student is going to have a challenging time, to say the least. And so this will kind of, prep you for that, essentially.
There's another part of the question that just popped up.
Yeah.
And they asked, how does the figure drawing program different from the anatomy program?
The figure drawing program is more like it walks you through the entire figure drawing process, so it's focused more on like doing complete figure drawings, right? And drawing, like we focus on gesture. There's like a certain methodology. You start with gesture, you build structure on top of it, and then you kind of apply some anatomy stuff. And we do talk about anatomy in those other classes, but not as extensively as the anatomy classes. And then, and then you kind of do some shadow mapping, which is a chance to do like some shape design. And then we talk about rendering. And so each class is kind of structured that way. Like the figure drawing fundamentals class, if you take the fundamental one, which is usually where, you would start, it kind of just slowly walks you through the whole process week by week for 5 weeks. So the first week will be about gesture. The second week will be about structure. The third week will be about, maybe we'll have like an anatomy a week, even though you can't teach anatomy in one demo, obviously, but I'll show you like, here's why you need to know some anatomy stuff. Here's what we're going to do with it. It helps describe and determine what overlaps you need to use and things like that. Then we'll go in and have a week where we talk about shadow mapping and edges, right? Because when you get into rendering, then we're talking about shape, value, and edge. And so then those last couple of weeks, we'll break it down where we talk about edge and shape 1 week through shadow mapping, which is basically just drawing shadow shapes and changing the edge of them. And then the last week, we'll talk about rendering, and how do you apply like a value scale? How do you break it up and how do you apply it to your drawing? And how do you, bring it up to like a full value rendered finished drawing, right? And so that's kind of more the fundamental class. Then after you've done that, then you would start taking like the regular figure drawing classes. And those are kind of they're a little bit quicker, right? It's not week by week, we focus on each step. Instead, like the first couple weeks, I'll do like, demos that are focused more on like gesture and structure combined in anatomy. And then the last 3 weeks, we'll do more like finished type drawings, and then that class kind of assumes that you've done the fundamental class, or at least understand the fundamental class type stuff. I forget where I was going with that. What was the question? I talked too much.
The question was how
the anatomy
drawing...
class, right?
Yeah.
I remember. So the actual anatomy classes are different in the sense that they're very focused on anatomy, and so the first week of that class is actually more of like a lecture, right? It's just like an anatomy lecture where, say we'll start, if it's a legs class, and each class is dedicated to a different part of the body, right? So say if we're doing like arm anatomy, it would be a 5-week class all about arms, right? Not like the figure drawing class. This would just be focused entirely on arms. The first week you go through like a lecture where I talk about the bones, the muscles. We draw the bones and then we do like layers of tracing paper on top to like figure out where the connections are for the muscles. What are the muscles? What do they do? Origin, insertion. You don't have to learn the names. I need to know them so I can teach them, but you don't have to learn the names if you don't want to. Then we go spend the following 4 weeks after that first week taking that information and applying it in different ways, right? So we would focus on week 2 would just be focused on like arm gesture, and focus on like how do we describe arms in different angles gesturally, right? And then maybe build structure on top of it in the next week after that. And then we start incorporating a bunch of that anatomy information and figuring out like, okay, how do we describe the overlaps properly if we're using all of our anatomy? And then how does that anatomy affect the rendering? You know, and then on the last week, we would focus on like how to bring an arm drawing up to like a more finished type level. So that's kind of the difference. That was kind of a long answer, but they're much more directed towards anatomy, I guess, is the short answer.
All right, we got another question for you from Brickman. Finally, we will get to your question here.
Brickman.
And it's the perfect time, I think, for this
Okay.
question because of what you're drawing now.
Cool.
He says, "Hi, Brian. If you send a diagonal line from the ends of the forehead or eyebrow to the center of the mouth opening, the intersection of that diagonal with the base of the nose will give you the width of the nose and tear duct. It always works in any view. That method is my patent."
Oh, you're talking about
Nice.
the triangle. What do you say from the corner of the eye to the nose to the mouth? Is it that one?
Yes, I think so. They would intersect. Oh, to the center of the mouth opening. So maybe that like kind of
The
middle
philtrum right
little
in there.
bulb.
Yeah, they used to talk about that at Watts occasionally. For whatever reason, I've never found it to be particularly useful for me personally, but I see people using it works. But you're right. Like in theory, we should be able to draw a line from the corner of the mouth down through the edge of the nostril, and it should hit the philtrum right there. And it would sit basically right there. And it should, boom, hit like right there.
I feel
Same
like
thing on the other
seen,
side.
I've seen Ben use that, and it looks really cool.
Ben uses it sometimes. The only reason I don't use it, like I use it to check my work, I guess. Like I'll look at it and you can use that to check your work, but it cuts through areas where you need the rendering to go a different direction, right? And so if you draw that in a way where it can't be erased completely, it's going to screw up the rest of the drawing, which is why I don't use it. Because I want all my gesture and construction lines to kind of support. In fact, oftentimes, if this were my own drawing, I wouldn't have even drawn the bottom of this line, this like corner of the headline I put in there, because this actually kind of goes opposite of where our rendering would go. You know, so I would only draw like a little bit of that here, and then I would actually leave this part off, you know, and not draw that part, because it would kind of interfere with the rendering. This would kind of go with the rendering. But that's it. That's my only reason for not using it. But I will say if something's not working and not looking right, I'll definitely use that to double check what I'm doing. It's pretty helpful for that.
All right, we got a comment from RF.
Okay.
And if you want to tell me what your name is, I will say your name because you're here every week. So
His name's
welcome
RF.
back. Okay, it's RF.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's really that, then it's RF. But in any case, they said, "Hey Brian, have you tried Cretacolor narrow oil-based charcoal pencils? You mentioned those in one of your videos. I have Cretacolor and Marie's charcoal pencils available in my country. I'm curious what country you're in."
Yeah, I'm curious what country you're in too. I have not used the Cretacolor. I've used the Marie's. They're okay. They're usable. In fact, I have a bunch sitting here next to me. When there was a point, like I used to use these Conte pencils, these things, and they stopped making them well. They're fine if you can get them sharpened up, but they went through a period where they were all broken inside and they were like impossible to sharpen the way I want them sharpened. And so I went through a period where I was testing like a bunch of different pencils and stuff. And those Marie's were one of the ones I hit on that could work. They're not as good as like these Wolf Carbons or the Contes, but if you get like the There's two kinds. There's like neutral and soft, I think. They look like this. And what's cool about them is they're made out of paper instead of wood. Well, I guess wood is paper, but they're made out of paper instead of like, like this, like regular wood. I don't know why. I thought that was interesting. Neutral. These are all neutral. There's a soft one and a neutral one. And they're both pretty good, right? Like they're both, like the neutral one is harder, but you can use it to get like lighter line work out of. And then the soft one is softer. And you would need both because you can't get, I don't know, the soft one's like a little bit too soft. So you can't get the lighter values out of it. And then the hard one is a little bit too hard. And so you can't quite get the what am I thinking? The darker values out of it. You can only get like the lighter values. So you have to use both kind of like combined to get like a full range of value out of them. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having to use two pencils necessarily. So the Maries, I think, are certainly pretty good. The credit color ones I've never actually used. They might be good. I don't actually know. I should order some and try them out because I'm curious if they're actually good. I feel like they probably are reasonably good. So I'm trying to design out this eye right now. Get that eye working. Then we get a little bit of the top plane of the lower lid wrapping around the eye up here. That way, and then a little bit of the eyelid itself. Same thing over here. We're kind of picking up that doesn't look good. That kind of like ages her too much. I regret doing that. I'll take it back out. But the rest of her eyelid is kind of coming from like over here. And then we get the crease up above where her eye tucks up under the brow bone, right? Which is what this line was here. That's the line for the brow bone. So it's basically passing right up under there. They sit about like that. I feel like they're a little bit different right now. It's probably good. And then we get the irises and pupil kind of sitting up in there. And it's tough because they're in shadow, so it's tough to see exactly where they are. They're basically right up in here. We get one right about there, and then the other one kind of up over here. About like that. And then we have to figure out kind of where the pupil sits within the iris, which can be challenging. What we need to know is that as the eye like turns to the side, you know, the iris itself has like a concave type shape to it, and then the opening of the pupil is like at the bottom of that concave shape. And so what happens is the pupil will kind of shift back a little bit. And in reality, it doesn't quite look like this, even though this is what's happening. And the reason for that is because the cornea is like a big lens that kind of distorts what we're seeing inside of there. So you have to kind of decide, do you want to go more literally and draw what you're actually seeing? Or do you want to go more logically and draw kind of what we know is happening, even though it doesn't quite look that way? Something about like that. And then this other eye is completely in shadow. So like can't really see what's going on in here. I'm going to draw it anyway, just because if I don't render this thing, it's going to look weird not having anything in here. And they're kind of like that, maybe. Although they look a little bit odd right now. It's a little better. And then there's not really a highlight in there. If there was, it would sit up in this shadow area, most likely. And the reason for that is because the highlight sits on the cornea, which is pushed out in front of the rest of the eye. Let's zoom out, see if it looks like, that's what I was afraid of. It kind of looks like the eyes are looking like two different directions a little bit, which can happen if you're not careful. We'll try this one again. Making this one a little bit longer. That should help kind of compensate for it. Looks a little better. I don't know. There's still something a little bit weird about it, but I'm not going to worry about it right now because we only have so much time. Okay, so let's see. Let's see what this whole thing looks like. It's not bad. I don't know. I don't know if I captured her likeness exactly, but it's okay. One thing to note is you want to keep this contour out here on the side of the head as subtle as possible, right? If anything, we want it to be more subtle than what we're seeing in the reference, right? We don't want to play it up because it is very easy for that to get out of hand and to be too active, right? We want it to be, if anything, more simplified than we're seeing in the reference. So we don't want to draw attention to it. Right? Subtlety is key to a lot of this stuff. It's looking pretty good. It's a decent head, I think. Not 100% likeness, but it's okay. Let's get a little bit of an ear shape on here and then maybe a hair shape, and then we'll see. What time is it? 8. What time do we start? 6:30, 7:38. It's been an hour and a half. Might have time to get some shadow mapping and stuff on here. So the ear, right, it works in an interesting way where we can kind of break it into thirds a little bit here. And this actually is something that, well, I learned it at Watts, but they got it from the Vanderpool book. And you can see it right here. If I can find the ears. Oh, I just saw it right there, where they're kind of breaking the ears into thirds, right? And the top third is like the top of the ear down to the bottom of the, it's called the triangular fossa, or like the kind of the upper part of the antihelix. And then the bottom of the next third is the bottom of what's called the concha, which is kind of like the indentation, like the inner part of the ear, you know, and then also where the antitragus starts is right about there. And then, of course, the helix is the part around the outside. And then the little like flappy part right there is, I guess you can see it better up here, the little flappy part is the tragus, and then there's like another little flap right across from it, which is the antitragus, right? This part up around the outside is the helix. This part on the inside is the antihelix, you know, and then that kind of opening in the middle is the concha, you know. So like the parts of the ear, there's only a few parts. Like it's not hard to learn which parts are there, but it is hard to learn how to describe them in a way that looks, you know, interesting and doesn't look odd. Because it's easy for ears to kind of end up looking a little bit weird. Right, so now notice our tragus here is sitting in our middle third. Right, the bottom of the triangular fossa portion of the antihelix is going to stop right there at the bottom of that third mark. And our antihelix is also coming down this way. And then it's popping out this direction, right? And then back around this way. Right, and then we pick up the triangular, or not the triangular, but there's like a little notch right down in here. Right, like a little tiny notch, and then we'll see the rest of that antihelix section come out this way, and then we hit the antitragus, which is that little flappy part on the other side, kind of right in there. Not a super easy thing to draw, but in terms of like learning anatomy, there's not that many parts to it, you know? So learning the parts of the ear isn't that tough. What's tough is learning to draw them in a way that seems kind of like a dynamic, interesting way to look at it. That's a little bit more challenging. Yeah.
I have some more comments and questions to read you.
Yeah.
The person who had asked about the figure drawing versus anatomy program,
Yeah.
Manvik said he is heading out and thanked you for the answers from before.
Oh, good. I'm glad they made sense because I felt like I was rambling about stuff, but that's cool. I appreciate that.
No, he said they were very insightful and has to head out for a bit.
And I hope you enjoyed the stream.
Yeah, I don't know. He might be gone now.
Okay,
But
I was too late. Yeah.
I wanted to, well, I mean, I just didn't read you the comment yet. But the follow up on RF is they're from Pakistan.
Oh, cool.
And they ask, how do you transition from drawing to oil painting? And they want to paint like Morgan Weisling.
Ooh, Morgan Weisling's really good. That guy knows how to paint. The transition from drawing to painting, I mean, really the only way to do it is to pick up a paintbrush and paint. But when you're drawing, like the way that I learned to draw, I mean, I've kind of changed it a little bit over the years, but like the way they teach drawing at Watts was to train painters, right? They're training painters through drawing. And so what you want to focus on is partly construction, right? Like this, and understanding how to construct solid forms. Because when you're working in paint, man, everything just moves. Like nothing's solid. Everything kind of moves around, and it's really easy to lose track of the forms, you know? So if you learn that in drawing to the point where it starts to become intuitive, then when you're painting, you don't really have to worry about that quite as much. And it becomes much, much easier. Also, I'm realizing the neck is too wide now. So that's one, right? Is you want to learn how to construct a head or a figure or a building. I don't know, whatever it is you're trying to learn to paint. You want to learn it in drawing first because it's way easier. And you don't want to have to work through that while painting because that's really challenging. It's possible, but it just makes things a lot harder. And then on top of that, you want to start working with value, right? And figuring out how does value work when you're only working with black and white, right? And maybe like a range of value. And you want to study shape, value, and edge, right? So shape design, right? Like how are you designing shadow shapes? How are you designing features? Value, right? Like how do you separate your shadow values from your lighter values, you know, like skin tone values? And how do you keep them separated in a way that looks really dynamic and works really well? How do you, I don't know, manipulate edges, right? Where are you putting your soft edges, your hard edges? Are you doing it in a way that's very strategic and helping? You know, so that's the type of stuff you can learn with drawing. And the reason you want to learn it while drawing is because when you start painting, things get way more complicated, right? Because then you're dealing with color, you're dealing with saturation, and you're dealing with temperature, right? So it's not just shape, value, and edge. Now you're layering color, temperature, and saturation on top of that. And so instead of 3 variables, now you have 6. And that is like exponentially harder to try and track 6 variables instead of 3. And it's a really challenging way to learn. And that's why they tell you like, learn drawing first, you know, and learn like kind of like tonal drawing specifically, because that'll take care of the shape, value, and edge. And then when you start painting, if you can do this stuff intuitively, then all you have to focus on is the color stuff, right? The color, temperature, saturation. And then of course also how to use the brush. How do you layer paint? How do you, you know, what type of brush strokes do you use? How do you want your painting to look? Do you want to use stains in the shadows? Do you want to use layer up the paint more in the light? You know, like there's a lot to painting. And so if you're trying to figure that stuff out while simultaneously still trying to learn just how to construct a head, it is very hard, very, very challenging. So that's the idea and why you would want to learn drawing first. I don't know if that answered the question. I forgot exactly what it was, but I think it did.
It was basically how to transition from
Oh, well,
drawing to oil
how to
painting.
transition? I mean, I would start focusing mostly on drawing and doing a little bit of painting. Like you don't want to wait to paint too long, right? Because there's a lot to it and you need to start getting a feel for the brush and the paint and that type of stuff, you know? So don't wait too long to paint, but I would start out focused mostly on drawing. And then as drawing becomes more and more intuitive, and a little bit easier, then start transitioning over to more painting, you know, until eventually you'll hit a point where you're doing like half painting, half drawing. And then you'll kind of eventually get to the point where you're doing like more painting than drawing. But I would recommend, you know, just waiting to see, I don't know, how quickly you're picking up drawing, I guess, how much time you have to practice, how much. But yeah, that would be my recommendation. Start out mostly drawing, and then as drawing gets easier for you, switch over to more painting. I'm confident Morgan Weisling would tell you the same thing. I don't know him, but I was trained by people that do.
There's a question from earlier from Jesse.
Yeah.
About the neck.
Okay.
Jesse asked, could you explain a bit about how the jaw is connecting to the neck? There's a triangular shadow shape connecting the two, and I don't understand if that's muscle, skin, or what. Not the SCM muscle.
Not sternocleidomastoid.
Right.
A triangular shadow shape. I'm guessing you're talking over here, maybe? It's got to be, because we can't really see the neck up in here.
I think that's maybe right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Oh man, of course, the one anatomy name I can't remember. That could be part of sternocleidomastoid, because it does split off and go that direction, but then there are things behind it as well. But if you look at sternocleidomastoid, it does do that. Oh shoot, I can't show these models. They have, here, I'll just grab this one in a way where I can show it. Ha! There we go, I can show it now. Right, if you look, sternocleidomastoid splits at the bottom and part of it pops back this way. So we could be seeing that, but then as you can see, there's another muscle kind of back behind it right here. I'm guessing that's more what we're seeing, but it's hard to tell from this angle, really, because you can see if we look at it, yeah, we're probably seeing this one. I wish I remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's been a while since I taught a neck anatomy. I taught one like face anatomy class, and then I ended up kind of deciding, I don't know, that it wasn't, not that it's not worth studying, but it's a very specialized thing that you don't really need to draw. I don't know how to describe it, but like if you're going into something where you need to know facial expressions really well, then knowing face anatomy is really helpful, and neck. But aside from that, I don't know if it fits with all the fundamental stuff that I teach. So I can't remember the name of that muscle, but that's essentially what's going on. Is there's sternocleidomastoid, and then there's another one that drops down behind it, which is what we're seeing here. And then behind that, I think, is trapezius popping out from behind there. You know, and I'm guessing this little shape right here is like that little triangular shape you were talking about. You know, kind of sitting like that maybe in there. Okay, sorry, just getting some indication on there just so I can see what direction the hair is going. Oh, then a little bit more of this on here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to snap a photo of this real quick. And then we'll throw some shadow mapping on there real fast. Oh no, I don't have my phone.
Want me to go get it for you?
Yeah, if you could. I want to take a photo of this real fast.
I'll be right back.
In the meantime, I'll pretend to draw more.
Here you go.
Thank you. Oh, I dropped it.
There's a question here for you.
Okay,
From John Fernandez,
cool.
who says, "Hi Brian, just a question. How do you start learning figure drawing? Do you recommend a teacher that critiques and guides during the process, or an online class would be enough?"
I mean, a teacher to critique and guide you is going to be pretty helpful, but you can get that with my classes. You know, I mean, there's ways to learn online. There are a lot of places now don't do the critique stuff because it's a lot of work. Like I know Watts, I think, stopped doing the critiques entirely. And, but with the way I teach my classes, I still do critiques, but that's going to change. Like we're going to change so that people going through the drawing programs will have the opportunity to do like what we're going to be calling like mentoring kind of, but it's basically like the classes, but without the demos, right? So I'll be doing just the critiques. So people that are working through the drawing program, like the figure drawing program, head drawing program, whatever, a few times a year, I'll do like critique sessions or like mentor things or whatever you want to call them. And then people can join that. It's like a separate thing. I mean, you have to pay for it separately because it's kind of like, I don't know, basically like the classes I used to run. It's the same thing. And then that'll give you feedback on your work. And so for 5 weeks, you'll be able to turn something in each week to be critiqued. And then I shoot a draw over critique, which is, do I have any examples? It's basically like this, right? And this is the same thing the way I used to teach at Watts and the way they teach. Well, this is from the Bridgman class. But essentially, oh shoot, it's all stuck. Right, like a student is going to turn in their drawing, and then I print it out, and then throw a piece of tracing paper over top of it, and then that's how I do my critique. Like I draw directly on top of the student drawing, and then talk about what I would do differently, how I would design it. Sorry, in this case, I was talking about like what was Bridgman doing? What were his directional strokes trying to show? How was he designing? Because this is from the Bridgman class. And yeah, but it works the same for all my classes, and I'll still be doing this at times throughout the year. So it's not like it's totally going away, but it's just going to be structured a little bit differently. And the idea, hopefully, is that this will free up more time so I can focus more on YouTube and making free content for YouTube and doing more live streams. And then on top of that, I'll be able to spend more time in our Discord channel. And so that people that are working through those drawing programs will then be able to, ask me questions in there. And I'll probably do some like live stuff in the Discord channel occasionally. Like my focus is still going to be completely on teaching. It's just going to be a little bit different. But it should still be pretty good. But I would say, if you can afford to take a class where you get feedback on your work, even if you're a beginning level student, I think it's worth it. I mean, partly maybe that's just because that's how I learned. But to me, like having someone that has a lot of experience look at your work and tell you what you could do differently, what you could do better, it's pretty valuable, like, at least I think it is. Okay, so we're going to do some shadow mapping. I'm going to try and lighten this just a little bit. It got pretty dark. Yeah.
We're at the 2-hour mark.
Oh,
In about
okay.
10 minutes.
Well, I won't do much of this. This won't take long. This will take 10 minutes. So essentially what I'm focused on here is just creating nice shadow shapes, you know, and figuring out what type of edges those shapes need to have. You know, is it going to be a hard edge, a soft edge? In order to describe the form properly. Tough little area. You know, so we get a little bit of a cast shadow dropping down there. Shadow is going to go up into the brow, right? So it's kind of merging with the eyebrow a little bit. And then we see it kind of pop back down over here. We pick up a nice soft edge up in here. And then the brow bone, kind of like the underneath part of it, is going to be relatively soft up along here. And it just kind of follows this, gets a little bit harder, and then it kind of follows this shape for the eyelid up here. And then it's going to kind of follow around this way, and then that shadow kind of drapes across the eyelid. Right about here, kind of cuts across and over. Sorry, zoomed out, zoom back in here. You know, and then we're picking up a little bit of shadow where the actual eyelid, the thickness of the eyelid is casting a shadow onto the ball of the eye, right? So there's actually a little bit of shadow up in here. And then that's kind of connecting to the iris here. And then there's shadow, of course, up in the iris, which we already kind of drew that part. And then the rest of this section is all in shadow already. You know, and then we have a little bit of shadow that we could draw maybe underneath here, but we have to be really careful, right? Because it's very easy to age people in a drawing. And what works in a photo doesn't always necessarily work the same way in a drawing, right? So we have to be really careful to not age her too much. You know, so we can put something in and then we'll get back and look at it later and decide like, is that working? Is it not? Do we need to change it a little bit? I'll put a little bit of that in there for right now. This entire eye is in shadow. All the way up through the eyebrow, we're basically just seeing like a shadow shape kind of come up a little bit. And then it kind of drops back down. Right? And then kind of pops back up and then over. Right? So this entire eye is in shadow. So I'm not even going to worry about mapping it because it's all shadow. Nothing to map. Right, then we can drop down here to the nose and say, let's get a little bit of shadow here on the nose. Which is just going to be a little bit down here on the tip of the nose because her nose is tilted down. So we're not seeing much of the bottom plane of the nose, just a little tiny bit. Right, a little bit of shadow on there, and then we get a cast shadow underneath there where we're going to see a hard edge up near the nostril. You know, it's like a hard edge up near where the shadow is coming from, and then it gets softer as it moves away from the object that's casting it. You know, then it's going to get the philtrum. like that shape. I'm going to try it again. Just going to simplify it a bit here. Right, and then that shadow is connecting with the lip, and the entire upper lip is in shadow, right? But then that is casting a shadow onto the lower lip, right? So we're actually getting a cast shadow from here down onto here, and it's making a very kind of challenging shape. Kind of doing that, and then kind of popping back up this way. Hang on, maybe not quite that much. Pops up and then over. Right, and then we're going to get a another kind of cast shadow down underneath the lip here. So let's see a good kind of soft edge for the lip. Right, and it's going to kind of pull back a little bit. And then we get kind of like this shape here. And it's kind of connecting into the shadow down on the chin. Now, before I work on this section, I'm going to go back up here, see if I can get this stuff to kind of merge the way we need it to, right? So I'm going to have a little bit harder edge around here, right? And then, again, our cast shadow from the nose is going to be a much softer edge. It's basically just dropping back along here, right? And then we have a little bit of shadow along here. It's going to come along the cheekbone. Keep it nice and soft. Just kind of link those up. Right, it's a very soft area back in here. We're not seeing a lot of like sharp edges or detail in there. You know, and then from there we can come in and start figuring out the rest of this. So we're going to have a little bit of shadow back along here and along the jaw, and then a cast shadow on the neck. So we can kind of start with this little shadow up here on the ear almost. Kind of starts right up in here and then drops down this way. And now what I'm going to do is actually change what I'm seeing here a little bit, because we're picking up a lot of shadow right in here. I'm going to eliminate that, because that's, again, something that's going to like age her a lot. And even though it kind of looks okay in the drawing or in the photo, in the drawing, I don't think it's going to work as well. So I'm going to start over on this side. And then kind of work to bring these two sections together. Right, we want a lot of variation in our edges. So I'm going to make this really soft up in here. Then it gets a little more firm, and then it gets a little softer on the chin again. Right, edge variation is important. And that's one of the things we want to focus on with this type of drawing, right? Especially if you're training to learn to paint, right? Understanding edges and where I'm using soft edges, right? Where I'm using hard edges, like right up in here, right here. You know, why? Why am I doing that? What's the difference? That's critical to understand before you start learning to paint. I mean, not that you can't learn that when you're painting. I mean, you can. It's just really hard, and it makes things much more difficult. right? And then we're going to have a little bit of shadow down here on the neck, right? So it's kind of going up over the sternocleidomastoid here a little bit. And over, right? Kind of wrapping around it this way, and then kind of dropping down this direction. And now, just like our cast shadow here, as that shadow moves farther away from the head, it's going to get softer, right? So it's going to get like really soft up in here. And then it's going to kind of hit maybe the collarbone or something. Over here, and then, I don't know, I'm not drawing the robe that she's wearing, but say our shadow would maybe cut across this way. And then, yeah, we're also seeing a little bit of shadow up in here, just ever so slightly. Right, just a little bit. You don't want to put too much because, again, that's going to make her, the more little things like that you put in the neck, the more it's going to make her seem like she's a bodybuilder or something. Which, if you're drawing a bodybuilder, is good. But if you're not, then it might be a problem. I don't know, a little bit of neck stuff. And then maybe a little bit of shadow in the ear real quick. And then we will be done. There's some of these little contour lines I put on there. Right, so it kind of wraps into shadow down here as the ear kind of like wraps around and then falls into shadow. Right, we're getting a cast shadow down onto our anti-helix here. Just kind of cutting across that way. A little bit of shadow, lighten some of this. Cutting up in this direction and then following down this way. And then it kind of cuts in. Something like that. A little bit of shadow down here in the notch. And then we're picking up a little bit underneath here with like a little tiny cast shadow from the anti-helix down onto the lower part of the helix.
I have a few comments to read you.
Okay.
These are from Ajax.
Cool. Welcome. Welcome, Ajax, to the very end of the stream.
Ajax, I hope that's your name because it says Ajax Par. I'm sorry. I'm gonna leave it at Ajax. Okay. Nice. Just finished doing 10-minute heads now. Oh, now I see this. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. And hey, Brian. I have noticed that when drawing on a humid day, 85% or higher, my drawings seem to be a bit more prone to smudginess. Is this a thing or am I crazy? You're probably not crazy.
You're probably not crazy. I haven't noticed the smudginess thing, but what I notice is that the paper changes. And maybe that's just because I'm using newsprint, but what I've noticed, and like, I don't know, I'm assuming you don't live where we do, but here we tend to get really dry weather sometimes. And sometimes we get humid weather, but it's more rare than the really, really dry weather. We get that all the time. And what'll usually happen is the paper will kind of wrinkle up almost. And I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh my gosh, what happened to my paper? This is crazy. And then the humidity will go back to normal and the paper will go back to normal. So it can definitely have an effect for sure. So I don't I don't think it's just you. I have no doubt that the humidity can affect your supplies. Okay, so I'm kind of marking where that highlight is on her hair. And then I'm going to go back in. I'll first kind of indicate where the hairline is. Notice I used a very soft edge here for the hairline. So you don't want a hard edge for the hairline. So it'll make it seem almost like a wig or something, like it's like pasted on there. We don't want that. And then I kind of describe where that highlight sits. Then I'm going to go in and add a little bit more indication of hair kind of along that highlight area. And first here I'm doing it kind of like describing each side a little bit separately. And then I'll go back in and kind of link them together just a little bit here and there. Just kind of drag a few things all the way through. And what that's doing is setting me up to be able to render the hair. You know, it looks a little bit odd right now, but if we were to fill all this in with value and then darken these parts and leave this part dark, I mean, it's going to be dark, but her rest of her hair is like really dark, like almost like our darkest dark. You know, and then this would be like, I don't know, the value of the shadows down here almost. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I think I am done because I think we're out of time. And hopefully this one doesn't get demonetized. Don't like that. Yeah, don't like that either. And that first mark I had down there for that looked really cool, and then somehow I lost it. There we go. Okay, I think we're done. Unless there's any more questions, but I think we're out of time. I still have to film a demo.
We do have one final question from Ajax,
Okay, final question.
who said Ajax is fine.
Ajax,
That's
you're up.
good. Okay. He says, when blending my tones, I have to be more careful because I think they get darker quicker. Huh.
Oh, like with the humidity?
Yeah, I think so.
I could see that. Yeah, I mean, because my guess would be is it's either affecting the charcoal and like adding water to it essentially and making it softer, or making the paper take the charcoal differently. One or the other. Yeah.
I guess probably that one.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. Yeah, I believe it. I definitely. I don't think it's just you, because man, my supplies do different stuff all the time depending on what the weather is. Cool. So that's the end. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it. And I will see you next time.